Hello, everybody. So excited to be here. Adrian,
Hello.
Nick, I have
Hey,
to,
hello.
it's been a while since I was this excited and this giddy about a live OTJ episode. So many people from around the world: Belgium, Zimbabwe, Canada, Colombia, Greece, UK, Pakistan, France.
Yeah,
Looks like we're
right
filling a
now
small
close
stadium
to
today.
close to 80 people joining. That's cool.
Yeah, we've got 20 people on YouTube, people on Twitch. Hopefully, not bots. Nick is with us here today. Um, This is our tech journey in collaboration with Nik Sumeiko, usually for TDD February, test driven development February. We like to do TDD focused topics exclusively in February. That's sort of my inspiration to OTJ, and we like to end on like a practical, like collaborative conversation slash webinar slash workshop with Nick. We did one last year; it was a huge hit, and we wanted to do it even better this year. Nick, thank you, thank you
It
for
will be
coming up
it,
with the kata. First of all, that one you're like amazing. I can't wait.
Dennis. It will be a masterclass today.
A masterclass. I like that. So I would like to set some expectations first. Um, Usually we fill up a small stadium with these streams. So we will be limit testing some technology. I don't know what, but something will break with it. So we are streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch. You will find us on these three platforms. We're probably the busiest live channels on there right now. There's links in the description. If you get confused, pick your platform of choice and stick with it. I can tell you from experience that the best visual quality you'll find on YouTube and Twitch, and we will respond the fastest to commentary on LinkedIn. I know that's not ideal. It's what we have. I'm sorry. We are working on like ideally we'd have all on one platform, but we try to cater to everybody. Here's our approximate schedule to set some expectations. Basically, we want to front load conversation, questions, and sort of having this be more like a collaborative coaching style classroom upfront into the first 90 minutes, 2 hours, right? So we will be sort of taking a pauses frequently, sort of interrupting Nick a little bit. I'll be bad cop today. So I will chime in a little bit to get Nick's attention back to conversation, because ultimately, if you have questions, we want to address them. Generally, what we would do is have Nick do the kata and then questions at the end. But there's so much to discuss and so many questions, at least from last year's experience, that they will be sitting around for a long time. And then by the time we get there, we just won't be able to address them. Last year, we had 250 people, and 250 people left over 170 questions, and we addressed maybe 30 of them. So this year, we're like front loading the collaborative stuff. But unfortunately, that means that we are putting pressure on Nick. I don't want Nick to be under pressure and nervous. So we are allowing for the eventuality of not doing all the exercises in the kata. So that's the trade-off. So we will, at the end, it's 1830 plus. It's like freestyle. If we need time for the kata, if you want to see more from the kata, we can. But ultimately, we will start in a few minutes, and we will sort of interrupt the session in like little Pomodori pockets, like working in small batch sizes in the proper TDD way. For those of you who don't know who we are, we're doing test-driven development with Nextjs today. I'm Dennis. The bearded gentleman next to me is Adrian, and our special guest today is Nik Sumeiko.
Hello, hello.
I would like to add something before we introduce Nick a little bit more in detail. You mentioned Q&A questions. So we will have a problem to think of all questions you will give us from the beginning, right? So we have 2 to 3 rounds of coding. You will have a lot of input, and we want your input, right? So you shall participate. You, of course, use the chat with each other, right? You can do that on YouTube, you can do that on Twitch and on LinkedIn at the same time. And what you can do as well is follow this app. Now I'm doing a little bit of switching here. You can do that just with your phone, or just go to slido.com and type in TDD Nextjs. So this is where you can basically put in your questions, and we will come to that questions in specific slots. So Nik will answer those questions. Dennis will answer those questions. And of course, you can answer those questions or, talk as a community who's watching about those, of course, as well. So that is one of the ideas here. And we will have some quizzes here. So have that app open. For as soon as Nik calls, there will be some questions for you. Quizzes, maybe some riddles, we will see. And you can take a look how good you actually get out of this. How good is your current knowledge? So that will be something. So remember that one. And yes, so I would say we going straight into a introduction phase now, isn't it?
Yes. So I think Nik, you will. I saw your show notes. I believe you will be introducing yourself as part of the kata. Yes. So
Yep.
I would. In that case, I would like to introduce Adrian. Adrian is a CTO. He's also my streaming partner, and we've been streaming on this channel for over 2 years. And we coach and mentor individually. We focus on different verticals of engineering leaders, and but we're all also both engineers, and we like to get our hands dirty. So the technical topics we're also super keen on. And Nik is one of the people who we like to have on our show, so that we keep sharp. So that despite working mostly with leadership and the organizational transformation nowadays, ultimately you gotta know how the sausage is made, and we need to keep our brains well trained. I'm Dennis. I'm running the Crafting Tech Teams publication, and I coach engineering leaders. You can follow me on LinkedIn, but ultimately, if there's anything going out today, I will be sharing a link on one of my 3D booklets. But I don't wanna steal Nik's fame right now. More on that later. Adrian, is there anything else you would like your audience or Nik's audience to know about you before we hand it over to Nik?
Well, I'm a Nextjs user, and I manage, I think, over 200,000 lines of code actively in Nextjs. And we managed to make it without a single line of server-side code. And that's actually so very interesting for me today to see how actually Nik is solving the SSR/RSC, so React Server Components topic. So for everyone who doesn't know what that is a very new technology coming out with React 18, and you need a framework for that, like Nextjs, for example. If you have any questions about that, feel free to ask in the chat. We will come to that later, what React Server Components actually are. But Nik is telling us today how to do TDD with a quite complex setup of having server-side, middleware, and actual front-end code, which is the reason why so many people actually don't do TDD when they use Nextjs in a full-stack approach. Let's take a look how that works.
Nik, you got the stage.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for introduction, and it's nice that many people come today, and I believe that many people out there are people who worked with me, whether on the mentorship program in the past or currently in my mentorship program, or maybe my ex-colleagues, or you probably have seen my contents online, and hopefully it was useful for you. So thank you very much for coming and deciding to spend these hours with us today rather than anywhere else. All right, so can we switch to my screen maybe? Adrian, please. Yeah. So I have prepared the kata, which we will try to solve today in Nextjs. And like anything, what is important is to understand the business requirements. So I prepared some features that we will develop inside this kata, and this feature is described here in this particular issue on my GitHub repository. The link to the repository is available. It's public, so maybe Adrian or Dennis, you could share that.
Already done. Yeah. So for anybody who would like to have a bigger font size or show something particular or scroll up, we've shared everything. Everything is public. The presentation is public. The GitHub repo is public. Please just open it up in your own browser in a separate tab and follow along with us. It'll be very difficult to cater to everybody's needs, but we will try. We will try.
All right. So understand the business requirement of this feature we want to implement. Let's look at the design. That's, I think, the simplest one, what we can do. And the idea here is to display some information about potential rockets that we could use for launching a space mission. And there we, as you see, display rocket, some details, what the status of the rocket, name of the rocket, and other technical details about the rocket. Then there is opportunity to select destination from various planets in our solar system, and there are some crew members like astronauts that could join our mission. And there at the end is calculated the approximately costs for that mission. And our opportunity is to decide whether we are satisfied with this cost, and if yes, we could launch the mission. That is a task, and let's go through acceptance criteria in more details to understand what happens. So our goal is to create a page with some rocket details. It's important that rocket details are displayed or rendered by as soon as possible by the server, because search engine optimization in this case matters for our internal crawlers that probably crawl something, pretending that we are NASA or SpaceX or any other company in that sense. And then we should have some planet destination selector, crew members displayed, and mission cost displayed, like in design. And there are some more details. So for the rocket, we need to display its model, capacity, manufacturing year, state. And the rocket is actually allocated in our Postgres database in Neon. And let me show you this production database. Here are some rockets that are in our list. Some are retired, some are already on a mission. One is available, probably the one that we will pick. So we could grab that from our Postgres database somehow. We will work out how. And then we have to enable to select the planet where we will launch the rocket to. And the planets could be arrived through our API developed by some backend developers. The preselected planet shall be the first one that arrives from the API. So it's kind of automatically not empty, that select box that we will have. And then API response looks like that, actually, for each planet. ID, name, and distance in astronomic units. Crew members, now astronauts retrieval, will be done through official NASA SDK, which we could consume in our React or Next.js project as a model like that, and they expose this kind of interface for each astronaut, not much details, and this public function will be available for us from the SDK, so we can consume it to get astronauts. So it's a black box for us how they retrieve it. Maybe they call some of their APIs or whatever, but we don't care. For us, it's just important that we have availability to use their SDK. And last, important, is a calculation of the costs for the mission, which will be considering different factors like initial cost per astronomic unit, so the distance between the planets where we will fly, then initial cost per single crew member, depending how many we will have available, and the cost will be increasing closer to the end of the year. For example, on October, November, the cost increases 15% because of different reasons. And for December, it's a premium pricing, 30% up from the base price. And at the end, when we launch, we have to call some action too. It's not described here, but I will show you later how it's done. And that's actually the goal. The design should be well, kind of describing this particular acceptance criteria. All right. So Dennis, what do you think? What do we do after analyzing these acceptance criteria in detail?
I think we'd have to sort of decide okay, it's a complex project. Like in what order do I want to build it so so it's valuable and I keep getting excited and I'm sort of bringing the future trajectory closer to myself. So I keep thinking, okay, can I start off in such a way that it remains visual, that it remains that I don't start off with like a purely backend thing and get lost in the weeds for like 2 hours. So I think the number one thing is we need to decide what is slice number one. What is going to be the small increment number one?
Well, I suggest just to look at displaying the racket, because that's what is the most important. We could render the racket information there. That would be our starting point. And I think this is a reasonable increment we could take as a first step forward.
So that increment would give us enough confidence in our stack that we've set up the project correctly, that our tools are working, etc., and then continue from there.
Absolutely, yeah. With test-driven development, what we start with when we look at such a feature is we think, okay, what is the user journey? User journey is a particular task that the customer or user arrive to our app to complete. In this case, the user journey would be to launch a mission, right? But there are more details in this user journey. For example, the user journey, let's speak it step by step. For example, first we shall open that page, open that app in a certain way. Then we're supposed to see within that journey some rocket details. Afterwards, we expect to select a certain planet or keep the default one, which is pre-selected for us. Then we could have a look that there are available astronauts for us and evaluate the costs, whether we are fine with those costs or no, because they come based on the distance and available amount of astronauts in place. And then last, we have to do a launching of the rocket. Hopefully it works. And when it works, this means the user journey completes. So I just try to speak up every step of the user journey. How about we start actually thinking about how to assert this user journey, how to document this user journey in a form of tests, okay? And before that, I wanted to show the slide from my slide. It's in Excalibur, that we will try to look at this project from perspective of this testing pyramid, where we will employ 3 types of tests. Some will be programming tests or code tests, others will be manual tests. And based on this pyramid, we will try to pick the right, more effective test for a certain job. And in my experience for user journey, the important test is something which is close to the actual user environment. So it's an integration test which involves the browser that tries to actually capture and repeat all the steps that I was speaking about within user journey. So let's start with these tests right away and write it, okay? And this test could be somewhere in app, and we could maybe define already some, let's say, feature, which will be a mission in that case. Within that, we could define some use case folder, so that maybe could be multiple use case within a mission. And I will, let's say, create launch use case, launch a mission, something like this. And there I will identify test, and the test will be named something like launch mission test.integration.ts, for example.
You call them integration. Why from the get-go?
Yeah, so why I'll call them integration. Good point. What I wanted to explain here is about a bit of a project structure first, what we are using. And we are using Nextjs with TurboPack. That was just default setup when I was setting up this repository. We will be using vtest for unit testing. And we will be using Cypress for integration, high-level tests that captures how the user interacts with the software right away. Plus, I already show you the database. It's Nano, the simplest database I managed to set up. And for that, we need some keys here. And these key I just copy pasted from my Nano test project. And I define them in this end variable because this is a standard way how to access some databases in
Keep in
production.
mind that this key is now forever public.
That's okay. That's a testing.
People will. Okay.
It's not your employer's key or something like that.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And I name the test integration and not just tests because I configured Cypress in such a way that Cypress will try to specifically understand only these type of extensions for my tests. So there is no clash with WeTests, which I will use for unit tests. So this way, therefore, actually, the name is here, nothing other than that.
So what you are writing is unit tests still, but the unit of behavior is sometimes interactivity, and you're using a end-to-end test tool to set up that interaction, and you don't want that to sort of be everywhere. So you're sort of limiting that to net naming convention. Very smart. Thank you, Nik. It's a nice trick that I learned last time as well.
All right, so I'm starting coding. There might be some moments which will be bottlenecks for me. Just try to help me write in comments in YouTube or LinkedIn where you are some helpful suggestions what to do if I'm stuck, because it's live coding. So yeah, consider these, please.
Yeah, we're all here to help you, Nik. You got this.
Thank you. All right, we start writing some tests already. I'm using some C available rocket details, let's say, and then select a planet, and then explore maybe costs, and launch a mission, like a very good name for an integration test that kind of will capture the user journey. The first thing what I already said is we need to somehow land to our app. In Cypress, it's done like that. We just visit our landing page, let's say. That's the first step. Then I will use some test selectors. You could use accessibility selectors. They are quite popular, especially now when the European Union took an act on accessibility. But for a purpose of speed, I will use data test selectors, which are also quite popular, and we use it at work too, to query certain DOM elements in the in our page. And for example, first I want to explore that there is a rocket model in place, and that rocket model should, let's say, have text, and we could define any, let's say, Starship will be our model. Then we will look at the selector of the planets. So I'm now inventing these selectors up front. I will afterwards incorporate them in production code, actually. But now I'm projecting my user journey, what will be there, okay? And I'm trying to kind of replicate what the user does with the page in the form of tests. So I learned how to evaluate HTML select, whether it has a certain value inside. And you need to do something like this, option checked, and then should, and then have text. Let's say Mars. It already suggests me. Perfect. And the next will be assert that there are a certain amount of astronauts. Get by test ID, and they will be astronauts, let's say, and astronauts. We will what we can assert. I'm trying to kind of look at this design. Okay, I already asserted that. I'm now asserted that there is some Mars displayed, and now I want to assert that there are two astronauts in place. So this is one thing that I want to capture in my test.
Maybe the count or somebody's name,
exactly.
or if you know that somebody will always be present.
Have length, let's say 3, for example. We'll have 3 astronauts.
Okay.
And then I want to look at the costs. And I want to assert not a number behind these costs, because this has some factors how it changed based on which planet you selected and so forth. But I rather want to assert that the costs will be different when I change the planet. So by default, there will be some costs for Mars, but then I could switch the planet and it will give me different costs. So I want just to see that there are differences happening when I switch different destination. And to do this, I will use some live template like this. Look what I do. I invented some costs, some test ID that I will query. I will take the text from that HTML element and get the value of that text behind. And then I will switch the planet to Jupiter and expect that the costs, again, I query that, are not equal after I switch to the planet to the initial costs when they were with Mars. This is my simple evaluation that there is some change in the costs happening on the page when I switch different factors that affect the costs. And after that, the last thing is I will click the launch button. Let's name it not a button, but control. Might be today button, tomorrow link. So let's name it more generic. And afterwards, I expect that there is get test by ID and there is some mission success, for example, should be visible. Be visible. So and that is actually from my test. Yeah, Dennis?
So I just wanted to ask if I got this right. You're writing a test that sort of the overall assertion is that this is my look and feel, and I want to have all the interactable pieces on screen. Am I getting this right? Like this test will sort of high-level test will sort of force you to put the main moving units on screen so that they compile, so that they can be wired up.
Absolutely. Some interaction of the human with a page.
Okay. So we're doing like a baseline.
Yeah, that captures my journey. Yeah. So, okay, we have put in the test some values already. There is some Starship, Mars in place, but where are they coming? And we looked at our acceptance criteria with details that they are coming from different sources. One from our database, another one from some API, another one from NASA SDK, right? So how to do this upfront, okay? And I won't do this upfront too. I will just put here some fixtures, For example, this will be my rocket that is fulfilling the interface of my database table here. This will be my planets, which are fulfilling the interface of the planets. And this will be my astronauts that fulfill the interface.
I saw that.
The interface of an astronaut. Okay, so I put just a fixture in this test, and that's it. I don't do further anymore with this test at the moment.
I mean, it does seem very assertion heavy, right? Like you're asserting quite a few things. I heard this sort of instruction to sort of just like keep each test to one assertion. And we have a comment on that as well.
Yeah, this is a very relevant question, and it is coming because you are used to unit tests. In unit tests, certainly you want small unit tests that assert small behavior of your unit. Here we are replicating the same thing what the customer is doing with our software. And the customer is not completing a task in small units. The customer comes and completes the task in one shot, creates a mission, looks at the costs, launches. That's it. Therefore, we are documenting the whole journey here.
So you'll be covering it twice, right? Like you'll be covering it like broadly with like an acceptance test, and then also inside out on like the core business logic with unit tests.
Yeah, I think it's time actually to look at my diagram, and there is the TDD circle that we will go through. And we just wrote a failing acceptance test, a high-level test that just tries to assert some interactivity on our page and captures the user journey. But very soon we will enter the inner circle in our development phase, and this will enable us to develop some details, as you say, design some details, as you say, Dennis. So we are here. Let's move forward, and the next step will be what I will do. I will start composing actually the React components right away, right here in my landing page, which is already. I have a design system, internal design system, which is provided by other team. We won't cover this today, it's just design system. I will consume it. And there is a component called Rocket already in this design system. We could fill in with some data that it even suggests here, with some state, for example, and for a state, we have badge design component. I'm aware. Let's put some key on that because we are in a loop, and the value will be, let's say, I'm hard coding now. Let's say available, for example.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy, long stream. Just please, if you can take a shortcut, just do it. But I do appreciate that you're calling it out.
Yeah. All right. This is cool. Now, this accepts some details, and I have also Rocket details that assumes, let me take from here, from the design, there will be capacity and year. So let's go capacity, and there will be some capacity. I'll put for now hard-coded, and there will be some year, and I will put some for now like this, for example. This is hard-coded stuff, and now the question is like where the real values come from, okay? And for that, we need to develop some code that will bring us these real values, all right? And now it's actually makes sense to run a short poll, Adrian, if you are here, to evaluate business logic.
Nice.
Good. I'm on it in a second.
Okay.
So, 1 second. Too many things at the same time. So we're talking about business logic, yeah? So let's start with the quizzes. So that's a chance, just for 10 seconds, QR code with your smartphone if you're watching on a desktop, or go to slido.com and type in TDD Nextjs, one word, and then you get to the actual possibility to work together with us on that one. And I will start the first one here, which is hopefully coming up now, which isn't. What's going on?
We are limit testing the technology, though. I am noticing chat is definitely lagging, so it's busy. We have over 100 people live.
So in the context of React or an Nextjs app, what is business logic and what is not? So first answer would be logical control of structures. usage of custom React hooks, interaction with state management, loops, JSX code, side effects, code that communicates to the outside world. So click whatever you think is correct and leave out what you think is not correct.
All right, but we can continue while
Exactly.
people are voting and thinking. And yeah, so we need to develop a code that will connect actually to our database as per acceptance criteria. And this is a big challenge, actually. So what I will do, I will copy this fixture from my tests that I defined directly here in favor to quickly fulfill these hard-coded values. For example, I'll do here model, and here I'll do dot state, and here I will do capacity, and here I'll do what I will do here, manufactured date, but that's kind of wrong, because manufactured date in our database will give us this ICO string, but we is supposed to display just a year. Okay, so there needs to be some transformation in place, right? Well, as soon as I see that there is a demand for data transformation, data extraction, if condition, else condition, loops, or the code that interacts with an outside world, this immediately gives me hints. This is a business logic. And if you see my slides now, here I have an interesting note that I was taught by one of my mentors at work here to see like what is actually business logic and what not. And unfortunately, many people in the React ecosystem think that the business logic is the code in the React hooks, in a custom hooks, or usage of state management is business logic. But for me, it's just an orchestration. It's a code that tries to glue up things together. The business logic is where you have logical branches, where you have data that is changed from one format to another, where you have side effects. This is business logic. When you think about this like this way, it helps you to identify how to test it. And as soon as you could identify, okay, I have a demand now for business logic. We are in this particular state now. I have a demand for business logic in there. I immediately design it through a low-level test, through a unit test. So let's do it. I create a file which will be allocated in tests. Now we will go with unit test. And I will name it something like launch view model.test.ts. And here in launch view model, I'll try to write something like launch model. So I'll try to design certain shape that will be used by our React component to render. So every business logic, all the data transformation will be abstracted inside this model, but the view, our React component, we just get an instance of that model and can use it to only render something, render DOM, let's say.
And Nick, I noticed that you took a very classical way of naming things. You view model, you had, I think you said business logic for transformation, presentation. It is a very almost old school, like MVP presenter style kind of naming things. Is this how you would name things normally in your everyday work?
Yeah. I'm inspired by backend development, by backend concepts, and I take the terminology from there. And I well for a front end too. At the moment we are building full stack, but yeah, it fits in. Okay, I start to write a unit test bottom down. I try to write first the assertion, and my model will be, or no, my result, that my model will have rocket, and inside the rocket I will have a year, which will be fixed number, let's say 2019. Then I write an action, and there I need to invent the name for a function that will produce my model. And let's name it get, or no, create launch view model, for example. And there I will need some input inside that. And I will pass there the rocket that we actually took a fixture of, that we created. This one, this interface that comes from the database. And now I go with the arrangement part. And I again have to copy this, for example, piece into my test. For now, to hard code. And there I will put, let's say, 2019. This is a transformation. Important, so we don't clash with Cypress. We need to import certain things from vtest, describe, it, expect, these things. Now it will work, hopefully. Yeah, we will launch this test right away. I have here a panel that tries to trigger, and obviously this test fails because this isn't created. I just invented it here. I projected it for the future. But I already documented here the behavior that manufacture date has this ICO standard output, but I need just a first piece of it here to be returned. Okay. All right. So we now see what? We now see that we already come for a second time with a certain shape. That's a rocket. I copied it from the test. I put it in my page and I put it here. This immediately is signal for me to define some interface, some type for that if we cannot import it from somewhere else. And to define it, I will create a domain object. I will create it here, domain rocket.ts, export type rocket, and this is my type. And probably I need to, too much. To delete everything is here. I'll put a string, but I know that capacity is actually a number because when I look at here, capacity is what? Capacity is a number. It comes from database in this format. And also I see these things. Okay, let's make it more strict than just a string. Let's put this in place. And maybe here we could do something like this. So more strict type in TypeScript. Cool, we have now this type. This is beautiful. We can go back to the test and try to make it pass. Okay, for that I need to create a sibling file. I will open it nearby. One directory up, the same name like my test, let's say model. And here I will name it just TS. And it should export for me my function. I'll copy the function from here, back here. Let me expand this a bit for you. And immediately I want to define the input and what will be the input. And I already put in my test that the input will be a rocket. Type input, this is, and there will be a rocket. And now I can use the domain object, which is rocket, from here. Cool, the input is here, so I'll mark it. And it makes also sense to define the output from that. So you have a protection in TypeScript that the type is not inferred from the output of that function automatically. Even TypeScript can do it. But the type is fixed here in favor. I don't need to write unit tests for evaluating the shape of my output. TypeScript will protect me on that. But I will explicitly evaluate whether in my output there are certain properties that are important for me for particular, let's say, transformation of the year. And this type will be a rocket and it will be expanded, let's say with a year. That's simple. Back to the test. Importing this particular thing, test reruns, it's still not passing because I return undefined, and here it looks for a rocket. So let's fix it. I could hard code the value 2019, but I want to do transformation right away. And you can see that Copilot, artificial intelligence, already helped me to do it. You have seen it,
I'm
right?
glad you showed that. We do have a question on that on Slido already.
So I have GitHub Enterprise here, and that's very powerful, and I use it daily at my work and anywhere I could, because it's useful. You have seen it simplified the stuff. Okay, the test passing, we are good. So now when the test is there and the model is in place, let's make sure that we fix the type here. And interesting is the following. I have here a lot of details which are not relevant to this test. For me, it's only relevant this transforms to this. All this is not relevant to the test. There is a way to employ a builder design pattern that could explicitly hide all the unnecessary details and highlight only what is relevant for a particular test. And for that, I could go to my domain object. I like to define things that related to my domain object in here. And I could kind of create a fake implementation of that. So let me do it and you will understand. Export function, create fake rocket. Okay, and that will return me. Oh, do I have this? I have this, I think. Yeah, it will allow me to configure the rocket. So I will use partial rocket here.
Nick, just so I understand correctly, because this part, I remember we did something like this last year as well on the stream, and I couldn't quite put my name on, like, we have an interface and we have a fake and the real thing and the fixture, and I found it very difficult to differentiate the fake from the fixture. What this is addressing, correct me if I'm wrong, this is addressing a code smell in the test, that it contains detail that the test doesn't need, right?
Exactly.
You're creating a test. This is a test helper.
Yeah, this is a test helper that adds some default stuff in there, and it enables me to overwrite it with important stuff and don't care about the details. Now I will use it and you will see how beautiful the test is. State, and there, let's say, put retired, for example. All right, so we identified some default, and there are overrides that we could make. This function will be used only inside test, but I prefer to put it anywhere nearby the domain object, so they are close to each other. And now I'm back to the test here. I'm employing this function right away here. And now I'm free to remove all what is not necessary.
This reminds me of BDD, right? Of a behavior-driven development. We're creating a domain-specific language that allows the tests to be really, really short.
Exactly. Tests, you see, now I close this domain, or you see the test becomes more simple, and now it highlights explicitly what is important. Here and here, this is important. All the rest is not within this test, not important here. Test still pass. I was running it in watch mode. All good in that sense. And you probably noticed that I wrote the test upside down. I started with assertion, action, and then arrangement, following this AAA pattern. This just helps with readability rather than if I would have some stuff inline or this way. I do it because I feel programming is a social activity, and other people in my team will maintain this and see this and touch this afterwards. So I want it to be clean. Back to the diagram. We looped now we created a test that failed because we didn't implement it anything. Then we made it pass. Then we did some small refactoring by simplifying the test actually. So the small inner loop within our circle. And now we will integrate this function inside our page and continue further striving to make the big test pass.
Nick, it seems like this would be a great time for some audience questions.
Absolutely.
We are short before the break anyway.
Well, so if you want to grab some tea, some biscuits, some water, hydration is very important. This is going to be a long stream. This is a good time. You won't miss any important stuff. We won't continue without you. Adrian, what questions did we get?
We have some. I start with the one of the chat, and then we go through the Q&A section.
Awesome.
So first one was, it was a question, was a business logic. So actually we'll get to that one when we go to the result of the poll. And Nabil E just had a question, why you don't put create fake rocket in test file?
Because I want to reuse it if necessary, and because I want that it is visible for me whenever I navigate to my domain object. So for example, I will land to this implementation at some point or somebody else, and they will see, okay, rocket, what is rocket? Okay, and nearby the rocket, I see all the methods that are helpers for that. And I'm not afraid to put it here because I know that strong compilers that we currently know will identify that this is used only in test and will eliminate it from the compiled code that goes to production anyway.
That was a good response.
That was a very good response.
Okay, then I go to quickly to the Q&A section. Let me quickly take a look if I can. Before I do that, I put that on stage because then I can remove it from my screen. So that was the result of the business logic question. So I repeat, in the context of React, next step, what is business logic and what is not? So the majority of people said logical control structures, usage of custom React hooks, which was actually what you have mentioned is, in your opinion, not the case. So I have to say, especially to the second point of the hooks, in that case here, most people I know working with React use the hooks as logic. So, and I know it is actually an anti-pattern, it's not meant to act like that, but many say that adds to the simplicity of React. That's true, but not to the testability. So long term, this will make your code worse. So you should have algorithms and business logic which can be encapsulated somewhere else and just execute it in a hook and use the hook as a vehicle. This is how I used to do it, right? I used to do it myself in the past wrongly, and since I'm talking about so many lines of code, I have already done. My problem is that I'm basically still refactoring that kind of stuff, or we do it. And I only can recommend to follow Nick's advice here. And then we have, a mixed thing. We have a little bit of JSX code, which is definitely the wrongest one of those, because that is actually markup. And that's one of the things. You shouldn't have any business logic in the JSX. So try to avoid that as good as possible. That is only code for view, right? And side effects, that's actually a good point as well. So that was a good one. Was interesting to see that one. Let me quickly see if we can go to the questions.
Nick, do you have any comments on the results?
Absolutely. I think that people who employ business logic within hooks, then they come to the point that it's very hard to test. And I have seen people are using React testing library to mount hooks and then test their behavior. And these tests are brittle. They are tied to React itself.
Because they have business logic in the hooks.
Yes.
Which is then difficult to test because they need to spawn the React environment.
Exactly.
But they do have a tool for that, so the tool helps them propagate the bad habits.
Yeah, exactly. And these tests are slower than the unit test that we just wrote, which is completely isolated. the business logic in hooks or in general in React code is not easy portable in comparison to the one that we just wrote that could be easily ported if we needed to backend or anywhere else. And therefore, just like Adrian said, that these hooks are supposed to be your bicycle that tries to orchestrate everything together, but not do explicitly some logic or some branching, let's say, much there. Otherwise, the stability suffers. It just becomes hard to test. And we want to have a solution which is simple to test.
Yep. Okay. I will try to get the questions online now. I haven't prepared those.
Yeah, I have a few start. We've already addressed one. Business logic we already addressed. I'm pulling that one off. Peter's question, Adrian, was the first one that you've highlighted as wanting to cover.
What is it?
Peter's question, Peter Armstrong. Can I put it on screen?
Yeah, I can put it on screen, of course.
So, Nick, a question for you. In the front end, is it recommended to apply TDD with end-to-end testing using Cypress, like the example you are writing right now?
I will do integration test. I don't call it E to E because I don't want to spin my backend. I don't want to spin the database in a certain state that is necessary for a test to complete. I think this is a lot of maintenance. We have at work a few tests like that demands the whole system to be operating, and they are very brittle tests. Very often they break. You need to change a lot of stuff in there. So I don't think these are effective tests. I think that we need to make sure that something that is outside, something that doesn't belong to our app, for example, database, SDK, API, this is a boundary until which we have to test. And then if you want to test these externals, then employ some contract testing. Okay, this will be way more efficient.
Thank you. I hope that addresses the question. Peter, if you're still with us, please let us know if you have any comments or follow-up. Adrian, back to you.
We have a question from Edward on the Q&A section. With the emergence of AI-assisted software development, how does this affect TDD, and how to perform TDD with AI in your case?
I'm doing this TDD thing at work, and I'm trying to employ AI to help me write unit tests, to help me write implementations mostly. Because with unit tests, I don't give it to UI because I need to do a lot of corrections afterwards myself, but I want to rather write unit tests or high-level tests myself because it's part of understanding. I want to understand the desired behavior of a unit or of the user journey, therefore write it by hand, but then give this output of my test to AI and say, okay, can you implement again this test? And GitHub Copilot is doing quite pretty well. You have seen it with an example that we had.
Sounds good. Next one. How to implement TDD in a legacy with no test. So probably no testing at all implemented right now.
Yeah, so you shall start with a test anyway. You should start. So let's say, very good question, actually. You could first try to reverse engineer a software behavior of the part of the app that you have to touch, because probably you received some business requirement to change something. And so at that moment, you reverse engineer the behavior, you have to understand it. Then you capture that in a form of high-level tests, the one that we started with, these integration tests. And then when these tests pass, because you probably understood the current behavior, you could do simplification of the code that implements this behavior in favor to incorporate a new business requirement that you want to make, the new change that you want to make. And the test will help you to see, okay, after you refactored, after you made it simple, easy to change, is the test still pass? If pass, okay, that's good. Now we made it easy to change, and now we can make an easy change. I think this was a quote from Ken Beck.
It is. And especially from his recent work, Tidy First. So you would say start outside in, like an acceptance test, like smoke test. Just it works right now. Just make sure. Me seeing the main components means it works. I'm not testing the core behavior of the old system because it wasn't tested, so I'm not adding that. But like just general, it compiles and it shows up on my screen is there. Then I make a change and I use that as a basis for my like first Lego stepping stone, and then I work myself up from there towards unit tests.
Yes.
Next question. We have two more. Any specific reason for choosing Cypress over Playwright?
No, back then when we started with Cypress, Playwright was not mature at that moment. I think it didn't belong to Microsoft even at that moment. So we went with Cypress at work many years ago, and I adopted this to my training projects too. I don't see a big difference. I played with both a lot and with Playwright too. I don't see a big difference. I don't see a big trade-off to switch from one to another. I just was used to Cypress and continued with that, and there is no big difference, I would say.
I would like to add something and more to a high level view of that, because that is very often a question. So when you're starting a project, that question is actually very tangible. But it is not the case when you are already 2 or 3 years in a project. Just to change for a little bit more on the pro side. But if your current solution is actually doing what it's supposed to do, it is most often not worth switching. It is the same with Next Vita, Next Remix, Vita Remix, framework types. There is not too much reason to change if you don't really are in a legacy state or something like that. Oftentimes this brings no new value in, right? So just wanted to add that because that's very often the type of question people ask.
And when there is value, what you're probably using is very bad. So the decision is obvious. And you just need to overcome your own resistance to make the decision, right? So either way, there will be an obvious choice. And if the choice isn't obvious, you probably don't need the change.
Last question in chat, YouTube. Wasim Mansour said or asked how this contract testing is implemented. Is something that you do frequently in a day-to-day work?
Contract testing?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
No, I don't do contract testing. I believe that this needs to be implemented by some people, and probably at work we have some people who are responsible for that and who are doing this. But no, I personally don't do it, and my small team doesn't do contract testing. So we just trust the APIs we use and documentation that is produced about these APIs, that they work as described.
If I can chime in before we continue with the coding session, I get this question a lot, and I echo exactly your sentiment of yes, if you do this, we should contract test, but generally I don't contract test. And it seems weird advice, right? Like the expert says, hey, do a contract test, but also the expert says, hey, I don't do contract test. I just wanted to add a little bit of, I know it seems paradoxical. I just wanted to add like my experience from like how I'm sort of explaining it to teams is when you're contract testing with that kind of boundary. So when you're integration testing with that kind of boundary, generally you would mock, right? So Nik had a fixture. Now we don't usually mock behaviors, but generally what you want is you want to mock an interface that you own that is being implemented by something you don't own, that is being sort of adapted into by something you don't own, right? So it is appropriately crossing the boundary in the correct direction. So it's going from general to concrete. When you have a mock like that, when you have a fixture like that, it is possible that your fixture is making your tests be green, but the fixture itself has gone out of sync with reality. That reality has moved beyond what the fixture provided. Maybe PayPal has done some, Shopify API has done some breaking change, the NASA API has done some breaking change. You didn't update your fixture. So your tests will still be green. So in general, the theoretical advice from all testing coaches is that every time you have a mock, every time you have a fixture, that mock can now risk providing a false positive in your code base And contract tests are a device that help you figure out, hey, is my positive a true or a false positive? That is the only purpose of contract tests. Are my mocks correct? And contract testing is one of the easiest to automate areas of testing: characterization tests, snapshot tests, architecture tests, end-to-end, just monitoring and having some snapshot payloads, some sample payloads, wire mocking, etc. So usually they are automated, or they are being done like from a different team, like a platform team or like a monitoring team. Great question, by the way, but we have enough time to go into that much detail. Just
We are
wanted to
now
add.
in round 2, live coding and QA integration. So, which means that we going again for a QA round after that one. So we have Slido open, as you just saw. Type it. It is always best to type it into Slido because it is easier to actually grab those things later on. But now we're going on. We're just going into the presentation mode again. And Nik is now going to show you the second part of the space mission, and just for you to understand how Elon Musk wants to get to Mars.
Yeah. So in the second part, we will show the culmination of this whole event. And the goal is to cover these acceptance criteria here, where we try to query some data from our database and have it available in the API and have it available for simple testing. So what is this acceptance criteria? We already discussed what is business logic, and I said side effects, or the code that communicates to the outside world. That's a business logic too. And therefore, I will design it in a separate unit outside of React, Next, whatever. The goal is to define that code. And maybe now we could run a poll about the adapter functional layer, Adrian, to check whether people are...
never mind. Okay, I was reading the comment of Adrian, and okay, never mind. I know what you mean.
Would be cool to look at clean architecture knowledge of the audience here. Onion architecture, hexagonal, they share the same thing about the adapter, more or less.
I think the ports and adapter pattern is one of the most important things to understand. To having some form of testable and clean code and non-legacy code. So that question is extremely important, guys. That other one is important. So go and vote. Let's take a look where you stand at the moment. We will definitely give you some hints about that in the next minutes. So that's the question. What do you think is the adapter functional layer? A term from Clean Architecture. You can find that on Slido, TDD, Nextjs is the code. But now we're going to the presentation again. You can go to the app on your own device. Okay, let's start writing unit test for the code that will be querying our database. It will bring us actually these kind of things from the database, explicitly from our Nano database, which has some rockets. And but before that, I didn't actually do any manual test. So let's boot the app and see what happens actually. I'm used to not do it because when I do test-driven development, I don't have, after every step, to look at the app and see what happens. I just trust the process, and in the end, everything normally works. And here, it does too. I just booted the app, and we see something similar to the designs that we demand, because I use this design system to implement stuff, and it looks already good. But the point is that at the moment, all these data, here is an issue I see. So manual test in this case helped because I used the wrong property. We made sure that the rocket within our view model has a year, and now it's correct. Okay. Unit test for the
what? For the code that will do an SQL query. I'll create it in the same folder where we have our test. No, I will have.
So we're still at the rocket, but now we did the presentation side of the rocket shape, and now we're doing the data fetching side of the rocket shape.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Data retrieval. Okay, so let's write this. Let's do something like rocket adapter. And within that rocket adapter, we'll have another piece available rocket retrieval. And there will be finally our test case, which will returns. It returns available rocket. We shall not forget that this code will be async because it will interact with some database, whatever. And now, after we did this, how do we fake the database? Because in the unit test, in any test actually, I don't want to go to real database. I think it's expensive. The test will run slow if I run a real database for my tests. How can we fake it? And there is this tool called test containers available. And let's actually use this tool. I'll introduce here a variable named container and a variable named SQL that will help me to do some SQL queries against my fake database. Then I will introduce, well, but as usual, we need to import some parts which are not here yet. Then I will introduce here before all hook. I think it's called hook in terms of vtest, and import it also from the vtest here. And inside there, I will do reassign my variable to something that I take from these test containers. And there is this class in test containers. I know because I'm using it, and you will know too. This class that comes from this package that is installed also for us and available for everyone that could try to create a fake database container, okay? And then I know that normally when we query a database in production code, we need to use some details from here. I already showed you that in my env, there is this particular URL to access the production database. So I need to make sure that when I write the implementation of that and I will consume this environment variable, I need to make it fake. So my production code that will be tested here within this test, it won't actually try to go to some external URL of my production database. Therefore, I will overwrite it in my test like this: process and database URL, and there will be container.get connection URI, I think. So the container that is faking the database exposes me a similar URL that I'm using that I will be using in production, and I can use it here. Fine. Let's reinitialize our SQL instance that will help us to do SQL queries, and for that I will use Postgres. It's also installed. Postgres, right? Postgres, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Import Postgres from Postgres. Cool. And the argument that it accepts is normally this URL of the database or an object with the parts of this URL split, the name of the database, your token, and whatever it's exposed. Okay, now I have an executable. Cool. So I try to fake the database with these 3 lines of code, and that's actually absolutely enough using test containers. What is necessary to do here is to extend a bit the timeout, because initial boot of these might take time, but later boots are not. So I will randomly put some more seconds than default. And I will also do a cleanup, not a cleanup, but stopping of our container when the test is over. After all could be employed for that. And I could do what this is suggesting me, something like this, and there will be await container stop. Where's my container? Okay, it misses a type. Let's fulfill the type. I'll just check in the implementation of this. What is the type? This is the type. It returns. So I'll put it here. Now it will, I think, make me stop. Okay. And then maybe let's also fulfill this type here. In favor, we could use this instance to do some population of my fake database. And the type of this will be return type of, that's the simplest what we can do, Postgres. So we just actually exactly what this returns will be a type. All right, let's continue with the body or the meat of the test.
Now
and
here, condition.
Yeah, I will start bottom up, down again. There will be some result that I will get from somewhere. Very soon we will evaluate here where exactly. And yeah, I need to import this expect. Now it will work to equal. And there I will put some ID name, almost correctly it suggests it. But look, my database probably produces ID randomly. So probably I don't need to kind of assert explicit value of the ID. I would rather do something like this. If you ever wrote or number, maybe. Let's see in my production database, actually. What is this ID? ID looks like number. Is there any type? Integer primary key generated, always identity. Okay, it feels it's an integer, so it's number. So I will just assert that the type is there, and then the rest of the things will be what is described in here. So model, capacity, manufacture date, and the rest. And let's do some fake things here. Like I will put this. Capacity will be 2, for example. And manu, let me copy this. Manufacturing date could be some date. And what else? State could be available. So this is what I expect my result to be. And now I will do an action, result. And here I need to invent the name for the function. Let's name it simple, get rocket, like this, for example. There will be some function that will be named get rocket, and it will bring us the rocket here. Before we start implementing it, there is one thing missing here. We created an instance of the fake database, but we need to populate it. So we need actually to create that table within that fake database. And I'll do it here. Something like this. So I'll replicate what is created in my production database. Ideally, you could have a migration file somewhere, and you could employ them rather than hard coding it like I do here. But I don't have any migration file here with SQL statements. Therefore, I just fake it like that, so it's close to my production shape.
Is it fair to say that this is a shortcut that you're doing?
Yeah.
To be practical on the live kata?
Exactly. Yeah. Migration is absolutely a must, because you will.
Okay. You wouldn't do this in production for a fintech company?
No.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right, the database is in place, and we are asserting here a certain value from a database. Explicitly, we want to get some rocket from there, which has a state available. Okay, and for that we need to seed our database, and I'll do seeding here, right inside, and the seeding code looks like this. So I will insert some rockets into my database. One will be on a mission. The second will be available, the one that we need. Last will be retired. So now my database is completely faked and completely ready. And the test is there. We just miss this. Obviously, this test will fail because we don't have the function here at all. And let it run. So it first tries to build a test container, and it fails. And now the step is to implement it. I will create a file nearby with a similar name. And the implementation of this is kind of super simple. If you know SQL at least a bit, this will be super simple. You could write, while I'm typing, you could write an SQL statement that is necessary. But actually, AI is doing this for me, you see? How beautiful now. So it even considered my domain object. It considered the SQL. And SQL, so where it comes from, the SQL should be initialized. So this is what was missed by the AI. In this case, I will use Postgres. And here, remember that I told you that we will use process and database URL. So we will use this real environment variable. This is how it should be done. What is else here missing? Maybe we could define a type here. It will be a rockets. With this statement, select from rockets where state available limit 1. So simple. And maybe here I could take the first item from the output and return it right away. Now let's try to import it in the test, this simple implementation, and run the test again. And here we go.
Okay, so help me understand, what exactly did we test cover just now? Right, so there was a lot of fakes, a lot of mocks, which part of what we tested was real?
The way how we retrieve the rocket from a database.
Mm-hmm. Because we have a lot of questions on, is this a unit test? Is this an integration test? I would say this is a unit test, right? Because
this is a unit test, yeah.
Because what we're testing, the unit of behavior, is something that executes a query against a real database, right? So that's the adapter.
Yeah.
Correct?
We designed an adapter now, a code that communicates to the outside world. And this adapter we made with a unit test, so we know that if we do something different here, for example, select from, we make a typo here, the test shall fail. And it does. So this is what we verify. We verify that the retrieval of our rocket is done properly.
But we are sort of mocking the database, but not fully, right? So a test container is not what you would find on Neon. So it is not equivalent, but it is a plausible enough replacement for us to actually test the real unit of behavior.
Exactly, yeah. According to our business requirements here, it was simply named rockets are in our Postgres database, so we query that.
This is a hard. One more question before we get into the weeds of the comments, because everybody's losing their mind of whether this is an integration test or not. Kent Beck and a few others, not everyone, but they emphasize the importance of unit testing as being isolated is not really about just having a pure function that doesn't communicate with the network, If your unit of behavior is just a network adapter, then of course you need to communicate with the network. But the more important factor about isolation is that I can run 10 of these tests on the same machine in parallel. Will using test containers allow me to do that?
Yes.
Or is there like
Yes.
some boundary here?
Absolutely. They will allow you. This container is explicit for that particular test. So if we create more test files like these, they will be separate containers that will not clash with anything that is created here. With this seeding, with this population of the database tables, nothing like that. I think therefore these test containers are created explicitly for that case, so you could isolate your fake database too per test.
Yeah, because if this is now slow, at the worst case, if it takes 30 seconds, then that's not a huge problem in a CI/CD pipeline or a dev's machine if it can be parallelized. But if it cannot be parallelized, then it gets into that, well, it's not really a unit test because it might take too long, so it might not be handy for quick feedback. So I always make sure to check, can this be parallelized or is this accessing some shared resource?
This can be parallelized, yeah.
Okay, good.
No, this can be containers are exactly for that, test containers, this model.
We do have some questions. We'll get to them in like...
Can I ask myself a question? Because I think here is important
Ask
part.
Ask
yourself in front of the audience.
You can ask yourself 2 questions. That's also a question.
Yeah, actually, I was challenged many times in the comments, in the posts during this week and previous week about all this event, that is it actually worth to write SQL inside your React app right in there, right like that? Is it secure? Is it efficient? Is it what we should do? Because everybody thinks that this is a big anti-pattern what I'm doing now. My goal today is just to illustrate that it's possible. Look, with Vercel and Nextjs, what they introduce, look what is possible. In React app, in Nextjs app, we could write SQL statements right there and query database without any API layer in place, anything. But if it's good or not, that's my question to the audience and to myself.
It's actually one of the patterns of the past. The full stack approach was actually something we considered legacy for quite a while. So I grew up in that area where everything was full stack, typical PHP stuff, right? C# was doing the same, ASP.NET, those kind of things. So you basically had your SQL query 3 lines away from your HTML. That was a little bit like how it was, or sometimes even inline. And that's an anti-pattern. We shouldn't do this anymore. And I think a good answer to your question is, before judging that, you should know what Nextjs or Vercel is actually trying to do there before you think of old patterns, which is not the case. Which doesn't mean I recommend that. I don't like that pattern, to be honest. I still think frontend and backend should be separated entirely. That's my personal take. So GraphQL is something very good in between. But it is not necessarily a bad thing to do if you understand the pattern and follow the best practices. So understand first. This is my take.
Yeah. Notably, this database that you're accessing this way should not have any very sensitive information. Like if it's going to be accessible from the front end without a proxy and it can be accessed with any query, right? Because we could say, yeah, this is a good practice, but behind the scenes, Nik has like huge security provisions set up on the actual database to make sure that something important cannot leak. But not seeing that, we might just, give unreasonable advice.
On a more complex application, this isn't feasible anyway. So when you have caching in place, when you have Kafka in place, all these kind of things, you can't do that anyway. So
Awesome.
so front-end should be front-end, which means that when you have server-side code, like in Nextjs functions, then it is actually for the front end and it's not meant to be the actual backend.
Yeah.
It is executing or it is for optimization for the front end. And that is the actual pattern behind that.
What I found interesting is that until recently, so Neon is what we would call a neo SQL, right? So it's a new age SQL database because it is addressing one of the oldest unsolved problems, or not unsolved, but the constraints of SQL databases, notably MariaDB, MySQL, Postgres, they were extremely greedy on memory usage for each connection. So for almost 4 decades, all of these databases, even when they were spawned in a managed system, had huge issues maintaining a huge amount of connections, right? So the norm was limit how many connections you keep open to the database by having a compute node in front of it that sort of parallelizes the resource usage to the connection, because the connections were a scarce resource. These databases, however, the ones that are edge databases that you see on Vercel, on Cloudflare, that you see on Neon.js, these are sort of new age databases that are doing like very, very, very complex WebSocket sort of proxying under the hood that allow your database to be hit in parallel by basically millions of connections without much issue, although it might cost you a lot, right? That didn't exist 5 years ago when the integration test books were written. I just wanted to highlight that this is quite new and unexplored. So I think it's worth pointing out that this is new, that we're treading in sort of on uncharted territory.
If we go back to the initial doubt whether it makes sense to use these SQL queries directly in your server components in React and Next, I would say no, just like Adrian said, but I see a very good pattern where it could be employed. The backend, let's say, logic, the backend code within Nextjs applications. It's when you have to consume multiple API endpoints from outside, and you need to aggregate the data from them or to parse or transform the data for your front end to render easily. So kind of BFF layer, that could be the use case to use React server components.
Yeah, good point. But that's a very specific pattern. In most cases, you have the typical, you have the front-end team, you have the back-end team, which is actually one team, which is working together with a commonized language like GraphQL or REST or something like that, or maybe some RPC stuff, and they are basically defining an interface in between, work together. But as you said, as soon as you have an application where the front end is actually leading everything and you basically pull from different sources, then it starts to make sense. But even then, I would argue that the more complex it becomes, the more complicated it will be when the front end is actually leading the things. Especially when you have a second front end, like, oh, I want to have a mobile app as well, then you are pretty screwed, right?
Yeah.
Good. Have you more questions to yourself? That was actually a good one.
I don't have any more.
Oh, okay. Then we need more questions from the audience, please. Okay. Let's go on with the kata. We have 15 more minutes for this round.
May I continue?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, cool. So we created this function. Let's try to employ it. Let's try to integrate it instead of having here a fixture hard-coded. Let's turn this server component, because that's a server page by default in Nextjs. Let's turn it into the usage of this. Look what I did. I replaced the fixture with the real retrieval from the database. And now it's worth to boot the app again and see whether something changed. Because what I expect now is that we will go to our production database and we'll get this Falcon 10 with 4 capacity available item. Since in our env file, we have a link exactly to access that database here. So let's check that. I refresh this, for instance. And you see Falcon is there. So we are querying real database now.
Again, this is not a test. This is the real application. So it's okay.
This is the real application. Yeah, that's not a test. And
it's
now
the
culmination. Yeah, and now the test here. How to make a fake of this rocket in integration tests, considering that this is done on the backend. This was a server component. So this code is not leaking to any front end. We cannot mock it anyhow because we have already compiled front end. We cannot mock it in a runtime anyhow, this function, nothing. So how can we bring it here in favor this fixture could be used as a fake? Before the culmination, I want to introduce myself. So I'm doing a software engineering, software development, plus I'm also doing training and mentorship for people online, mostly on LinkedIn. But at work, I work in George, that's a digital banking of Erste Group, for more than 7 years. And what we do, we ship payment systems. I'm explicitly responsible for that. And I think that's a kind of breathtaking responsibility, because you could screw up anything with your software, but definitely not people's money. They will lose trust. Therefore, this job resonates with me, and I love it because the responsibility is very high. We should ship really quality thing. And therefore, all these efforts to design things simple and write automation tests so everything works and is confirmed before we really ship is necessary as a part of my DNA. And this job drives me crazy to raise the bar of professional software development. I practice it myself and help others at work and outside to learn the craft. Explicitly, I'm specializing in clean architecture and test-driven development for React, and now also for Nextjs projects. All right, back to the test. We want to fake the backend adapter here. For that, we need some helper infrastructure, and this helper infrastructure will be this. I will introduce here another variable, which will be called use rockets. And these use rockets will be created using create server adapter factory, an abstraction. Okay, I will name it use rockets, and it supports a callback, which I will just reference my function like this. So I created this, looks like a hook, but just named like a hook. But I created some instance using some helper that helped me to do it. Now I will integrate it directly in my page instead of direct dependency on this SQL query that is made here. I will eliminate this dependency, but put another one. So I use this. Here it exposed me as get data like this. Let me suppress one.
So this is the glue code. This is you inverting the dependency by creating, by leveraging the glue code you already have.
So yeah, I removed this call directly to that function that does SQL query, and I use this instance that was created by a factory that exposed me get data. And now I will introduce back my rocket variable, where I will call it like that. Okay. Simple change, but it doesn't have to affect anything. I refresh my production app and everything is in place. So we are still calling a real database. Nothing changed. So it was a small refactoring that we did in the middle. But this gives us an opportunity to go here and to use another helper function from infrastructure that is prepared for dependency inversion. And this will be called inject fake adapter. The first argument of this injection will be a reference to our adapter. And the second will be what we want it to fake with. And here I will move this code, oh no, this one, inside here. This rocket could be eliminated. Now, let's run the test. Booting Cypress again.
It's no surprise that we are having some disagreements in chat already. Is this
That's
endpoint?
nice.
Is this
Yeah,
is this
that's
is this component? Is this narrow? Is this wide?
Yeah. So what we expect here is that this line will pass now because look, the starship is now faked here. So we expect the starship is there. Let's verify that.
For those watching, if Nik is using helpers or hooks or little plugins that you're not familiar with, the repository is publicly available. You can go check out what Nik has installed in this test repo.
So we passed this particular line. The starship is there. Before it was not passing, but now it's faked. Let's just, for the sake of a changes to XY that and change it here. And rerun the test. We are here. We are still passing this line. So we kind of using some helper infrastructure for our testing, made sure that we made dependency inversion, let's say, for our adapter. Instead of really letting it call the production database, it now uses this fake stub. How does this work? Yeah, I have a diagram for that. So first, what we do is we, in test code, try to call this helper function. This helper function has a reference to the adapter, which is tight coupling, but we will discuss it in a minute. And the reference to the adapter plus the stub, the second argument, allows us to allocate these data into fakes map of fakes for that particular tests. They are isolated by tests. Then we try to do CI visit because we somehow need to navigate to our app, to our first page. And at that navigation, the GET request happens because we normally, when we try to access any website online, there is a GET request made to retrieve some HTML. That's exactly what happens in Nextjs. It tries to get us landing page on front. At that moment, that GET request gets intercepted, and it looks in fakes map and sees these are any fakes for that test that we are running now. And if they are passed through the headers of that request to your server code. Then they are allocated in app context. That's React context API, so they are stored there. And then in the production code that is behind that, remember that I inverted that dependency. Instead of using the get rockets directly, I employed this intermediate use adapter that was created by a factory. Whenever this get data is called, this infrastructure, test infrastructure, this actually factory function that I wrapped my adapter with, is going to the context of the application and tries to see, is there any fake for that prepared? And if yes, it returns it instead. And it doesn't matter whether you are in client or server code. It just works this way. It has this kind of system, this kind of test infrastructure of these few things has disadvantages, but also advantages that you could now simulate the test even with a backend code, with a server code, which is not mockable, not stubbable anyhow else from Cypress or Playwright or anything. You could do it like that now. So let me address this. This is tight coupling. I'm kind of importing into the test the file with an adapter. And I thought about this a lot of time. I thought like, now my test knows that there is this adapter in place, and so what to do? And I thought actually it's useful for that case, because these integration tests, they run slower than unit tests, much slower, because they demand the browser, they simulate the user interaction. And therefore, if we reference them, we could use an algorithm for every change that you make to identify only relevant tests that are related to the code change that you made. Because we could analyze a dependency tree. We could see, okay, have you made any change that involves this adapter? And if yes, this test makes sense to run in your CI, let's say, but not others which are not affected by your code change. We do it actually, it works this way. We cannot afford ourselves to run all the tests when we create a new code that we want to push to the main branch, because our only React code base is more than 2 million of codes without test, more than 2 million lines of code without test code. And therefore, there are so many tests that we just cannot afford to run them in CI. Therefore, we have an algorithm that can identify, based on your change list that you are about to push to the main branch, which are relevant tests to this change list by analyzing the dependency graph. And this hint that there is a reference to this adapter gives you exactly this opportunity. So only this test will run, but not others. If we would not do this, but do it somehow else, then we would need required to run all the tests, because there would be no opportunity to identify which are actually relevant to the change list you are pushing.
When it comes to automating, like, this sounds like an architecture test, right? Like, you're also implicitly checking, hey, are you overcoupled, undercoupled? Like, is the dependency graph clear from like the change set, or at least what's covered in the tests? And it also gives a hint that it is being developed using TDD, or at least test first or test soon principles. How does this relate to you collaborating with your team? Does this actually, at what point does it become you said this is a trade-off. At what point does it make refactoring harder? At what point does it introduce like a maintenance burden? That must be difficult to balance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when your adapters change often, then maybe it would be a problem. But oftentimes they won't change often because they depend on external dependencies on the database, on API. At work, we use only APIs actually, and therefore you have an endpoint. The endpoint quite rarely changes, and therefore you don't touch your adapter code much. Because also, if the dependency behind the adapter, for example, API, introduces a breaking change, then probably it makes sense for you to pay attention to your adapter implementation and make sure that it's now aligned with this breaking change that this external dependency made on you.
Nick, how far are you from wrapping up like this particular test? Now would be a good time to sort of
that was actually the culmination. So I wanted to show you how to fake the React server component that is not exposed to any client, that is not visible anywhere in the browser. And this was what I wanted to actually show, because the rest will be, if we go through the requirements, the rest will be to use some API. So this will be already client request, and this is quite easy to do on the client. Another case will be with NASA client.
An SDK.
The SDK, we will do a simple way too. It's from we are calling it from a client, therefore we have access to multiple things, so we could fake them and replace them, swap them, whatever, much easier. So for me, it was important to show how can we do it, how can we fake the server output, let's say, and we did. And I think, from my side, main and core point here is done.
Because
Could
the
you show
challenge-
what's inside use rockets, because we have this question several times. Maybe just put it on screen and then you can. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Is now a good time to go over the questions? Notably, the elephant in the room, which is this an integration test? Is this an end-to-end test? How to how to brain parse everything. Adrian, maybe start with a quiz.
Do we have a quiz for that?
We have something running, a poll, I think.
Wait a second, please. Then going on stage. That was this one. I actually had a problem in the beginning, so most people were there, but they couldn't vote. So let's take a look what actually happened. So all people were correct, but it was just 6 people participating and not the 20 like before. So I probably think most would be correct then. So that was basically the other one. Then we have a new one going on. We can already start that right now because that is a free question. You can find that again now as well. What are the cons behind connecting to the database directly from the app without the API layer? Because we have now already 2 or 3 questions about that. Nik was mentioning that. You will find that on slido.com. Type in TDD Nextjs, go to the code. You can type in there. You will see what the others are writing. Let's take a look for that after that one. Yeah, that's actually it. So, removing that one. Shall we go through questions just for the management now? Because regarding the timeline, we're having now the next round coming. So, Nik, is there a next round actually? There is a next round.
Yeah, absolutely. We will continue with some coding further, maybe without me looking at so many details, because I want that within next 30 minutes or so, we make the high-level test pass.
Just go through the user journey.
Yeah, so we will complete the whole journey.
I would recommend that we go through 3 or 5 minutes more questions, and then we have a real break, that Nik can have a break, we can have a break, and then we go through the final stage where we have some real coding and editing to get that kata done. That would be my recommendation now.
And Adrian, can I slightly share some things that I'm looking for our audience while everyone is there? Okay. So as you know, I'm doing trainings aside from my main job. I actually love my main job, therefore I don't want to switch to trainings only. So it's only like an evening activity that I do. And I'm looking for people who are the same, who has some main job and want to do some side gig and join me actually to build the content creation business aside from our main jobs. I believe that it's possible. I know that every content creator is trying to pulling and do everything alone. So the margin of getting the value out of this is very high, but or very low for that particular creative. But I don't think that this is a way for me. I want to share the value. I want to share the earnings we will make through these educational contents. But I need some people in my current team to join. And here on my screen, I listed these people. You could go to the URL.
Your screen is not visible. There we go. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm looking for people to join my team. If you have a background in IT in general and have some other skills in programming, and you would love to join my endeavor in training thousands of people online through content creation and doing such an events like today we did, then you could go to the URL, which is this one, my website /join. Maybe can you please publish it into the chat with nik.com/join. That will lead you to this page. And there you could read about people that I'm looking into my small team with the endeavor to great trainings available for developers online. Yeah, if you want to join me in this endeavor and you have some spare time beyond your main job, this will be wonderful, and we will do wonderful things together. You will be the benefits actually. Yeah, let me give you a benefits. They are similar. You have an opportunity to create an impact because I have a lot of followers online in different channels where we already can impact people for good. There will be automatic personal growth for you in creator economy. There cannot be any other way. You will have a cool environment working with me directly in my spare time. The culture working with me is really good. It's the same I do at work, at real work, and at the evening hours. You will get a share from every sale we make if we try to sell some courses and so, or workshops, big and small ones, because I'm currently already doing a lot of mentorings and workshops outside. Tools, flexibility, opportunity for you to build a portfolio of projects, accomplishments when working with me, and career relationships. At least for me, building a good career relationships are very important. So yeah, go check out this. If you want to join me personally and be in my team, then that would be wonderful. Thank you for giving time for that, guys.
Of course.
Of course.
Nick and I talked about this a few years ago, actually, and I'm really glad that you keep pursuing this. This seems to be like very important to you. And yeah, so props for not giving up on the dream and like working full out. Also, thank you for preparing the kata. I know how annoying it can be to prepare like interesting katas that are tangible but also easy to explain with like a complex domain without having to have a lot of background knowledge. So you've done a lot of work already for us and for the community. So I just wanted to thank you, Nick, and for being such an awesome guest. But we're not done yet. So with that, Adrian, question time.
What we say?
Question time. Let's do
Question
questions.
time.
I'm dying to have the is this. I think everybody's on the edge of the seat to discuss the integration test issue, the elephant in the room.
I have another question. Can containers fake out Redis? So test containers, can they fake out Redis? Ingest?
I don't know. Maybe they can. I think I didn't try them for Redis, but sure, go
Well, you
to.
can always write adapters, right? So you could fake it.
I can vouch that that is possible. Yes.
Mhm.
But I have to say that Redis generally, if you're building an adapter for Redis, for example, a caching layer, and you're testing that caching layer adapter, then that makes sense. If you're testing your main application and in the production setup it is configured to have a caching layer, and that is breaking your tests, that doesn't make sense. Because you shouldn't be testing your caching, like you shouldn't be introducing that many dependencies into your otherwise unrelated testing scenarios. Same goes, for example, if you use PubSub or event streams are very interesting in Redis as a very good use case for them. If you're doing that and you have an adapter that connects directly with Redis and calls like the low-level Redis functions for managing the stream and the groups, then that's okay. If that is hidden behind a service layer or repository and you're actually testing something on the front end, I would say rather not do that. Do the approach that Nick has suggested, right? Put an adapter in between and then test both sides of the adapter, the data side and the actual communication side, the low-level database access side. That way there's no confusion about which is which I think triggered most of the questions here about, hey, is this end-to-end integration, etc.
Okay. That was discussed only in the chat so far. Kenneth asked, I would like to know what is the key difference between types and interfaces and how they influence your test. It's a typical TypeScript question these days. Because you have both and both are quite similar but different. Are they actually making a difference in context of testing, Nick?
I let Peter Ivanov answer this question. He's my follower on LinkedIn. And
Is he here?
I don't know, but he has posted about this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any big difference, like I said, between Cypress and Playwright. They have their caveats, they have their difference, but they are not significant, the same interface and type. Yeah, they behave different. You could extend one and cannot extend another one in certain way. I use types, sometimes interfaces. I think this is some minor detail, at least for me in my development job. Never had any troubles, whatever I use.
Yeah, they are in most cases interchangeable, especially when you go for testing. You want to have them, or at least one of those, right? To have something you can rely on in testing and have some linters telling you, no, it's actually part of the testing as well that the linter goes through. People don't recognize that. That's the first line of defense you have there. Actually, the TypeScript building process, of course. And those things should work. So you should have one of these in place, but you actually don't change them during runtime because they are actually, defined during during typing, right? So I don't think they have an influence on the actual testing itself. So it is more like how you work with TypeScript, how you work with things like C# or something like that. There is the question how you actually work with interfaces, not really during runtime. That's already where you run things, especially in the TypeScript world.
Is it possible that we might have misunderstood this question and it was related to like the class meaning of the word interface, not the type meaning of it?
But
let us know.
How they influences the test was the...
Yeah, so like mocking against interfaces rather than mocking against concrete implementation. I can see a way where we misunderstood which meaning of the word interface we interpreted. But I think the author can let us know if you got it right.
Yeah, Kenneth, let us know if we totally fucked up that one. Okay. Do we have some more questions?
Yes, we can just go through the list, I think. Emmanuel was asking one, right? So Emmanuel had a series of questions. Observation, not a question, but he has a follow-up. So Emmanuel says, for me, the Cypress test is not integration, it's end-to-end. His question was, wasn't the unit test of before a narrow integration test, right? So, but I think the thought process here is consistent, right? So using an end-to-end testing tool, you call that an integration test. You touch the database, we call that a unit test. Like, are we using different words for the same thing, or is there nuance that we're missing? I think that sort of captures the spirit of the question. Emmanuel, please correct me if I mischaracterized your question.
For me, whenever you say end-to-end, for me it means that all the systems are booted and spinned up and are ready and are involved in the test. Here, no tests were demonstrated that we connected to any system outside of our code base. We faked the database to test the adapter, so we were not going to some production or special testing database. It was just done with the code here, not outside. So no network request anywhere were done. The same with integration test. I call it integration in comparison to this low-level unit test, just because they involve you to capture different things. One thing you do, you capture the user journey, how a human interacts with your software. This is what we capture with these high-level tests. But with unit tests, I call them small pieces of behavior that we try to assert, behavior of the code in that. Human doesn't know about that at all. Therefore, this is where I put this line of differentiation. But they are definitely not end. They are not end-to-end because I don't go anywhere outside.
So when we're using end-to-end with Cypress, it's an end-to-end testing tool. We call that an integration test because we're testing a a family of behaviors, so a larger part of the user journey, and what we are integrating with is the browser.
Yes.
We need the browser in order to express that test.
Yes, exactly.
So we're not really integrating with the database because we're faking it. That makes an integration test. No, we're testing a user journey, and in order to do so fairly, we need a browser, and that's the integration point. Not the other endpoints that we are mocking or maybe using test containers for. Did I get that distinction correct?
Correct.
As a follow-up from Kenneth, yes, you are right, Dennis. Units of the system. Oh no, test containers. I missed that one.
Oh yeah, I love our chat right now. I love how interactive this is. This is great. Are you guys having fun, by the way, in chat? Like, is this? Did we get the bar?
This guy
right
does
this
have
time?
fun, right?
I was so excited and giddy all day about this episode. Oh, okay, we have a few more questions. I think we can go.
Yes, we have. Going from top to bottom, Adrian asked, there's one approach to avoid writing the contract test if you are using end-to-end using TypeScript on a single monorepository. Simple example could be to generate GraphQL using GraphQL CodeGen and share it between API and frontend. This way, TypeScript will tell you when you break it. That's the same approach as things like the T3 stack or similar things are actually doing that, but GraphQL CodeGen is a very good example here.
The question that I asked Adrian, the Adrian in question, was like we can jump the hoops of contract testing if we just use GraphQL. And I thought to myself, isn't the framework that generates the GraphQL providers and, let's use a simpler example. If I said we're using gRPC, if I'm compiling the gRPC components together, aren't I still, at least to some degree, coupled to the interpreter of those compiled binaries, right? So if I have the schema compiled, I'm still coupled to some degree with the interpreter of the schema, right? So if you used a migration tool to check your test container, I'm still to some degree reliant on being integrated with it, right? So if I did a package JSON update on one of those key components, I would still be coupled to the same degree that, hey, maybe my tests would fail if they don't integrate correctly with the framework itself. I know that I'm splitting hairs on this, but that's where we got to. To me, writing the query for GraphQL, like the tree representation of what you want, is no different than writing an SQL query. And if that's okay on like a middleware front or like a backend for frontend kind of full stack middleware, I don't see much difference from that to what
actually
Nik
it is
presented.
because what Adrian says, you can use things like a follow-up things like YAP or something like that, where you basically have a structural test, but that is not really a test for the fine data. So you can have a test for a string, but not what's inside the string.
So you're doing a wire mock over the data you're getting, formatted to some degree, rather than the raw representation of the data from the database.
Yeah, but that's actually a good thing, especially when you have a lot of JSON type data in your structure, right? With a lot of, let's say, document type of data, like we would know it from Mongo or something like that. Then you want to have those type checks between those both worlds, and GraphQL is something pretty interesting to actually translate between the both worlds. That is not that bad. So
because it generates the types and it prevents it from being used incorrectly. So the compiler would
exactly. But on the other hand, many front-end people reuse the types, but they modify them because, for example, just because GraphQL gives you a string, it doesn't mean, for example, a type. Right? So types can be enumerables, but GraphQL cannot basically handle enumerables. It is just a string. And on the front end, you want to have different versions of that string, and you can't go that deep. So that is the downside of that one.
I'm going to say something that's a bit controversial sort of beg to disagree slightly here, which is the key detail that we're missing is that if you're using GraphQL, there's going to be a provisioning and a consuming side. And if the provisioning and the consuming side are the same team, are the same organizational unit, then I agree with you.
That was what he's saying, monorepository.
Yeah, Yes, but if that the consuming side and the provisioning side are in different parts of the organization, and they walk differently, they have different managers, they have different strategic objectives, or the GraphQL is supplied by an external company like Shopify GraphQL, for example, and you're just on the consuming side, then I would say no. Then I wouldn't rely on those types because they are crossing a much harder boundary. So I would then, even though the type provides me that safety, I would contract test that type because I have no guarantee that the other side is still playing ball with
That
me,
is the
right? Because
reason
they're not.
why people for external APIs still prefer REST REST over
Yeah.
GraphQL.
Yeah.
GraphQL is very good for internal teams where you know each other, where you have your interfaces set up. But when you don't have that, it's actually a good idea to still stay with a more chatty REST version, which is more deep or fine-grained what can be behind the string. What are the error codes, those kind of things. GraphQL is a little bit no chatty about this. It is a different thing, right? Yeah, good question on that one. Then
Nick, if you want to add something before we move on to the next question. If you're following up, I did notice that there was some commotion behind you, so if you're distracted, that's also okay. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, all good.
Okay. So I will go through go to one thing. So David is basically saying that you should have an API layer in between. Then we have Kenneth who says this comes under integration testing. How would you handle scenarios where you are Dockerize the service, what you are testing? That's actually something different than you have shown.
So does that mean that the adapter we're talking to is talking to a REST API that is also like a typical microservice infrastructure where the adapter would be talking
this is
to
another
pattern.
I don't want to, it's best, I think that Nick is actually answering that question, but it sounds like a misunderstanding in what Nick was actually showing.
Nick?
In whatever way the outside dependency is available for us, we should not go beyond that. How it is, like maybe it's Dockerized service.
Maybe this is like an internal dependency, like another microservice within the same organization that we do have access to and we could spin it up. Would you?
No.
That's how I'm interpreting it.
No, I still would not. I would still stay within the boundary of my app, let's say.
Your team, like your responsibilities. Okay. Kenneth, let us know if we got the connection, if we got the interpretation of your question right, please. I believe you're still with us.
Last question. Question for Nick. Do you always use an end-to-end test tool like Cypress to test for your front-end components, or are there times you use something like React Testing Library instead of real browser?
I don't test components. You have seen in the integration tests, there was no reference to the component itself, React component. I test user journeys. But if we look at the design system, that's a different story, because here in the kata, I have prepared design system that I just consume. But if you develop a design system for your app, then I would go with React Testing Library and try to test the behavior of the components with that, with a virtual DOM and so forth.
So just to add some, because Kenneth, yes. Kenneth says yes. Thank you, Kenneth. And Emmanuel said, this is why it is important to align these concepts before starting, because we do not all see this the same way. So I also wanted to highlight that what Nick is doing, hang on, I just want to hide the names quickly so that we have a little bit more real estate. Thank you. What Nick is doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're doing BDD. You're doing behavior-driven TDD, right? So you are not only writing tests that cover the components, but you also do not want to mention the components in the test so that you can refactor the components, right? Because the less you touch, the less the surface area of the test, the more refactorability you retain. If you mention the component and you mount it explicitly in the test, You cannot refactor the name of the component, the position of the component, the parameters of the component, and you also have this, and you also introduce this whole React testing library issue of like, am I providing the context? Is it auto-wired? Am I? And you get like, you open up a whole can of worms just to have a little bit more pedantic control about is this unit or not.
Yeah,
and the trade-off.
Mhm.
Sorry, and the trade-off there is that normally in a unit testing environment, we would also use something like Gherkin or like a domain-specific language where we sort of stringify at least the act and the arrange part of AAA. And your trade-off is instead of a domain-specific language that uses strings, you are using Cypress. Did I get that right? Like, am I off here on my interpretation?
Absolutely, yeah. My idea with these high-level tests is to make sure that they are as black box as possible, so they don't know about implementation details. In fact, or in favor, you could refactor any implementation details, like how the behavior is implemented. This test doesn't care much, whether you are using design system, other components, this or that. You could change this, and the test shall fail only when the behavior of the software really changes, not how you implement this behavior. This is the goal behind all this.
Mm-hmm. I want to follow up onto the component test idea. Actually, I like Cypress component testing quite a lot, and many people still think that Cypress is only about end-to-end testing. But Cypress component testing is quite a powerful way. When you have, for example, very often in our applications, we have that traditionally since 15 years, very complex text fields. They can do so many things these days, and the input field of HTML itself isn't suitable. So you need to have tests how this field actually behaves. And we do this. This is a typical CSR stuff, right? Only on the client. And Cypress component tests are actually a great tool to have that. I really like that one. I quickly can show it if you like. I have that open from this morning. Quickly can show what I mean by that.
But I also wanted to remind that if you watch our previous session 1 year ago, I was doing integration test with Cypress components testing, because then we were developing the client-only React app that doesn't do server-side things, and therefore this is the most efficient to use actually Cypress in components mode for integration tests. They look similar, but instead of visiting a certain entry point, like a page, you mount your app, let's say, or a high component in there.
This is actually what Cypress component testing is. So it tests several cases. You have a text field as simple things you just expect when the things behaves, when you click on an X, so it basically deletes it. And that is what is actually doing. There's no integration whatsoever. It is just the actual React component. And not to forget that still CSR components are probably 90% of the React world. Still, so SSR and RSC are on the rise, but still the majority of components we have out there are CSR, so it is still a relevant thing to consider. Just wanted to tell that.
It's important, Adrian, to think from the perspective of fragile tests. How are these tests that you just demonstrated are fragile? To me, it's kind of makes sense that you are testing a behavior or a certain component, and this means that this component should be not to your actual application. And therefore, when you do this kind of test for design system, that's fine. But if we are about to test the actual application with its business rules, then this test is not fine, because you will rename this component and the test will break and so forth. So therefore, I think it's important to distinguish what do you test. If you test component for a design system, sure, couple the test with the component. If you test your business rules, your actual user journeys, then no, the test will be brittle otherwise.
if you test full stack, yes, then it's not good enough. But I still prefer. So it's just my personal way how we do that is that we really have our components, and the backend is basically tested separately, and that is still something I prefer pretty much. But I agree, when you have a highly integrated system, then you need to test it that way. So it doesn't make sense when you're in a high integration, like a full typical Next.js approach, how I used to call it, right? Then you actually need to have this, let's say, in German we have a special word for that, but actually this entire round trip, you need to test that to get the idea of, is that stuff actually behaving correctly? And that is, so yeah, it is of course contextual. And I think that is so interesting because Dennis just posted the link from the last time. TDD is not really bound to one of those. It is basically the practice to to do it in an iterative small batch approach, and but how it actually turns out, and that is the very interesting one today, is what you have shown. I saw that the first time, so it was interesting for me as well. So good feedback from my side. That is a very important thing, especially because there is such a push towards server-side rendering and React server components, so that the full stack approach will not be something like a niche thing in the next 2 or 3 years. It will become a very prominent one. I don't know if it's the dominant one, but a prominent one, and people should learn how it, especially understand how it actually works. And that is so important to actually understand what you just told the people today, because many front-end people don't realize why they have to check for SQL in their code. But if it's the pattern, you need to do that actually, right? So otherwise you don't have the proof if your application is deployable or not. That's important. Okay, we have more questions, but should we go into the next round actually?
I would like to go to the next round. I just want to emphasize that there's a really interesting discussion going on in chat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to dive deep into that right now while Nick is going into the third round. I would like to emphasize that we are now going into the less structured part of the call. So we are now doing round 3 and immediately going into the Q&A and freestyle. I'll be interrupting less. I'll be structuring the call less. There's less Slido quizzes going on. This is now Nick taking over, and there's going to be a lot of code very quickly. I just wanted to prepare you for that. I'll dive into chat because there's an interesting discussion. Go for it.
Can I instead of maybe continuing live coding to save the time, can I just pull the branch with all implementation inside and we just review it, like do a code review and reason about that?
So you want to give like a payoff to everybody?
This will be way faster, simpler than I will code. Yeah.
Okay. Can we get a 1 in chat for everybody who wants to see the final product? A quick 1 in chat will do with everybody who's still present for Nick's suggestion. And Adrian, please help me because my chat.
We will go through all the necessary parts, but just by reviewing it instead of coding.
Let's do it, Nick. I really appreciate your suggestion.
Let's just do it. It's fine, right? It is your session, so it's good.
Let's do it.
Emmanuel approved it. All good. So. But maybe we shall I show your screen again, Nick?
I'm cleaning up to switch to another branch. Okay.
Nick, I also
shall I show it? Shall I put your screen on screen?
Nick, I also noticed that.
Yes, please. You could share my screen.
Nick, I noticed that we have some delay with you.
Yeah.
Your graphical quality dropped. You were frozen for a bit, and I think we have some audio delay. I don't know if there's anything you can do about it. I just wanted to point it out.
I don't think it does matter. As soon as it's buffered correctly, it should work.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So the next step in the implementation would be to make sure that we implement this destination selector, so the planets, and let's see how it's done. I will be back to our page component. If you follow my screen, hopefully. I used another, I created now a custom component here, which is called mission the client component, and I explicitly stated here at the top that's not anymore a server component. It passes the rocket down from the server component, actually, so there is availability for that. So I implemented an astronaut list, which is taken from design system, and there I pass astronauts. And astronauts I also retrieved through certain, no, not astronauts, sorry, first planet selector, first planets. And planets are coming from an adapter which queries the API. So let's explore quickly that adapter. Here is use planet. It's implemented using very simple 2 lines of code, fetch certain API endpoint and just give it back the response. We don't handle here errors, nothing, for the sake of this particular kata. And I'm using another factory, which is called create client adapter instead of server adapter. We are using create client adapter, which has similar inputs and interface and everything. So this code looks very similar. And I would design this code also through the test. And for the test, I would use mock server service worker that will allow me to actually fake the API. And there is this mock service worker model available in general where you could fake an API. And here is an example how I'm doing this. I'm taking a certain URL that will be called and here faking the response of it. And then I'm calling my function from the adapter that we just seen. Let's open it nearby here. This one that does fetch. And I expect that it returns me back what was faked here. And this mock service worker spins up a light server that actually intercepts all the API requests that goes outside. I mean, the ones that you define here. With Cypress, you could do it with CI intercept too. There is this command that does very similar stuff for client API calls. And that's would be a reasonable alternative to this test, but I want to have this in a unit test and not have it somewhere else in a high-level test. Therefore, I test this piece of code using this simple test involving mock MVC, mock servers worker. And then these planets are used on our component here. They are allocated in a certain state because they are fetched when the component first mounts. The component mounts, we fetch the planets and set them in internal state of this component. I'm using useState from React to allocate them. And then they are passed directly to our planet select. And there is also a handler which updates the currently selected planet. So we have access it within our internal state as well, here and here. Okay. Then I implement astronauts list by using design system component too that does already the design. And astronauts are also retrieved through some adapter, use astronauts in this case, in very similar way, but instead of having there some separate function that do a fetch or so, we are employing this NASA SDK that gives us the astronauts. This was described in our acceptance criteria that NASA astronauts could allow us to call a certain function and give us astronauts. So this adapter is even simpler than any other way. And I don't test this adapter since it has only integration code. There is no actual call to somewhere else rather than SDK. But the usage of all these factories that outputs me an instance of these adapters allows me to fake them in integration test. We will come very soon to the integration level. And last thing what I do here is costs component. And with cost component, 1 second. Я скоро закончу. Да. And with cost component, this is the place where we will calculate the cost based on some criteria. And for that, I create a model again, because look, cost calculation here, it's a business logic with multiple logical branches, with multiple factors to consider. Therefore, I create a model with a unit test as well. So I design it this way. I write some unit tests up front, and you see everything is very simple and clear. I'm employing some builder pattern to hide some details and highlight what is important. And this model outputs me some result.costs that covers different cases. And here is implementation based on that test. It could be refactored. So for example, these magic numbers could be abstracted into more meaningful variables. These months indexes could be abstracted away too. The point is that these tests are green, they are passing, and they allow us to do refactoring very easy. And another important point is when I write the test that does branching, I always check the code coverage, because code coverage makes sense only in unit tests, in my opinion. In any high-level test, doesn't make sense. And vtest allows us to visually see the code coverage. For example, if I open this file inside the browser, we can visually see, has it been generated? No. We can visually see that something, where was it?
Vtest by default, when you have the coverage plugin turned on, it'll only regenerate coverage for the
Here.
things that you actually ran. Yeah, so it has to be that one.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So here we can see visually in this coverage report which logical branches was covered and so forth. With TDD, it's automatically will be all covered, because you write test for each logical branch up front and then implement against this. But I just wanted to highlight here that there is this tool in vtest that allows you to see visually the branching coverage.
Also, I saw you using WebStorm
miss
for yourself and other WebStorm users. If you request for the coverage, so top right, there's a run button in your IDE. If you run your tests using that, if you hit the drop down and you open up the menu, there's an option to say with coverage. If you run your tests with that setting, then WebStorm will put coverage on screen for you in your IDE directly into the line vertical where you would normally see git blame. That has been a very reliable way of getting coverage into your IDE without having to share the HTMLs of the coverage reports, because they can be a little bit cumbersome. A lot of teams commit them into their CI/CD pipeline and then only run them there. But if your IDE supported, I would wholeheartedly recommend. Yeah, that. So what we can see now, that red bar, that shows lack of coverage in Nik's IDE. That red bar, the vertical bar next to the line number.
Yeah. So for me, it makes sense to pay attention to the coverage only within this separate layer where I have business logic, but not within the components at all. Therefore, you see it red here.
So what you want is logical branch coverage. And the tool shows line coverage, so you will only use it reliably with confidence when in areas where you know that the line coverage matches with branch coverage, which is only the unit tests that are testing functional cores of behavior.
Precisely. All right, so we created this model, and there were some input that we needed for this view model. Astronauts, because this was one of the factors to calculate the costs. The same destination, we were using some distance from the planets to make sure that the costs are correctly calculated. And then I'm using the design system component, just feed the costs in there, add some labels, and add also our test selector here. And last thing, what I do is to introduce these controls that will launch our mission. So I create a button using design system component to make sure that it's disabled when costs are not available, because costs could be not available if, for example, the astronauts didn't fetch yet because they need time. This is a synchronous call to NASA SDK. So at that moment, the button is disabled until all the factors are ready and the costs could be calculated. I also add to that button a test selector in favor to query it in the integration test, which we already did. And this handler is, last important thing, executes a server action. Some people asked to demonstrate that. So here is an example of how to use a server action. And server action is the same thing that we want to fake in our integration tests, and therefore we need to use some adapter too for that. So let's explore what is behind this handle. We are calling this launch function, and it comes, so pay attention, this is a client component, okay? And we call launch from this adapter that we created, which we explicitly mark as server adapter. And here we do a bit different, the opposite like we did with other adapters. Let me open some other adapters nearby. For example, rocket adapter. Here we had a function that communicates to the outside world, and we just reference it within this factory that is creating an instance of the adapter. Here's the opposite. We are trying to employ the factory function that creates an adapter. It gives you adapter, and here we will put some server code that we want to happen within this server action. For example, it will save it to the database that we launched a mission with certain criteria. And what we expose away is this launch function that just consumes this adapter created by this factory. This way, similar way, like, and then we can consume this server action, that's the right term in Nextjs, directly in our client component, like we do here. And when we clicked our control, this is a handler for click button, we get some output from our server action and set it into some internal state. And this is just necessary to make sure that we display a different GSX output, a different component when we successfully launch the thing. So now let me show you how it works. Manual test, not an integration test first. And in manual test, back to our app. Is it spinning up? Yeah, compiling. Yeah, this is how it looks like. You see everything is fetched. This is client side, this is client side, and this is calculation. We can change. This comes from a real API, actually. So because we are not in test, we are manually testing. So when I select, pay attention that here the amounts of costs changes because the distance from Earth to these planets is different. And then when I launch, I made that server action. And when this server action fulfilled my response, so the synchronous operation succeeded, then we see this as a screen. And now let's look how it works with unit tests.
So if I understood you correctly,
I will show today.
The server action being interpreted correctly from the client side to the server side, that already works automatically out of the box. Like that is the full stack operability of Nextjs. That's what it provides. But you wanted to control the shape. But you wanted to control the shape of what is exposed, so that you can more easily have the shape be testable. Because otherwise it would be too much.
Exactly. Therefore, I wrap all the adapters with these factories that produces the instances of the adapters. Without this, I won't be able to fake them in my tests. And
So
here
you
is
so you
this last one for this.
so you
Yeah.
extract an imperative shell from the functional core. So with the server action, you're exposing the functional core and you're letting the server handle the imperative shell. Whereas with the rocket example earlier, it was the other way around.
Yeah.
If I understood you, like if I'm using a slightly different metaphor for like a more functional
Exactly
metaphor.
like that, because it's a
Mhm.
server action. Therefore, it's an opposite way done here. But it uses the same test infrastructure or infrastructure tools that enables us to have a simple faking of the outcome of this server action. This code didn't change. I kept it that, but we compensated all this in a very similar way. So we faked all this stuff. And here is how it runs. It visits our page. Will be quite fast, I guess. Then we are done. And test is green, test is passing. Uh, One thing to show, what if we don't do this? What will happen then? The test will
So
obviously fail, and it will
for
tell
me,
you
the screen
missing
was
test fake for
pixelated.
use planets.
For me, your test was pixelated.
Mhm.
What did you
But
comment out? Which adapter? Which fake?
I commented out one fake to retrieve planets, for
The
example.
planets. Okay,
I
thank you.
commented one fake, uh, planets, yeah. And then I returned to the test and test because this test infrastructure that we have in place, it knows that the production code demands some adapter. And it tried to call it, but didn't found a fake for that. And this is a very good sign from the test perspective. Test tells you, okay, somewhere in this software, in this app, in this behavior, is involved certain adapter. So you have to fake it. Otherwise, if we don't fake it, it should go to the real other system, other dependency. It should go to real API, real database, real whatever. And the test doesn't allow this. It immediately tells you, no, I won't go anywhere outside. You are doing it wrong. Please fake the adapter. So therefore, you are back here, faking the adapter. And then test is, okay, I'm good. So this was it from my side. I think it made sense to show you, to reverse engineer it, to review it,
Mm-hmm.
how the flow is there instead of coding this by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. At the end, you look, we did a very extensive coverage of all boundaries. So all adapters, we made sure that they are tested. Rocket, which was querying our database, planets that were doing API call, astronauts that were calling NASA SDK. They are test covered on a low level with unit tests. Plus, we have a user journey that is replicating the main business rules, the main business task
Mm-hmm.
in our app. And this gives you a lot of confidence, especially if you run this in some CI pipeline before shipping to production. And so,
Mm-hmm. Very good.
yeah, thank you everyone for joining today and staying longer. So this was my idea that it's still simple to test Next.js applications.
Mm-hmm.
Good,
We
good.
have some more questions in chat. Nick, how are you? Are you under time pressure to wrap up? How are you on time, Nick?
Oh,
If you can hear me. Can you hear me, Nick?
I can
Yeah,
hear
he's
you.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe can you stop sharing my screen so
Yeah.
I can
So
see
the
the
connection
comments
gets,
too?
yeah. Mhm. Is it this one?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Yeah, so let's tackle some questions more for next 8 minutes, and then we are done.
Deal. I like that. Actually, if you can stop sharing, Nick, I think it will improve your connection a little bit, because I do notice you're stuttering and you're slightly behind on the. Yes, thank you. So we've addressed quite a few already. We have a question from Wasim. We have quite a few questions from Wasim regarding why not encapsulate all the related use state, the use effects, into a custom hook. This was in relation to I believe, the server action and the rocket example. But this one in particular to the server action, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's the next steps that we will do in our big. So the first we try to put the minimum code to make the big test pass at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have this black box test that guarantees that if we do refactoring, if we do more separation of concerns, for example, we put some custom hook, and there the test will still passing, and this will guarantee that we are good. So this is the goal with test-driven development. We first make it work as soon as possible with the test coverage. And then when you have this working version of your app with a test, you could do any underlying changes as you want to improve your design.
So this was the reasonable next response to starting off, so that to make sure that whatever you are creating is test covered. And then what Wasim is mentioning is that now you have it covered at a high enough level so that you can refactor and put it closer to the glue code or further away from the glue code, or do it object oriented rather than functional. So now we have created a platform that allows us to explore Wasim's suggestion. Okay, Wasim, I hope that answers your question. Adrian, is there more? Do we have?
No, what a second.
We have Adrian's question. Nick, do you have any strong opinions on wrapping client components inside server components that fetch data versus fetching the data directly within the client component? A good example would be a select component. So a select component that renders the options, I believe, directly as a response from the API call.
You should evaluate what is important for your search engine optimization. And for me, this component was not important as the details of a rocket. The rocket gets getting scrapped by the crawlers internally, as it was said in acceptance criteria. But this interactive element is not anyhow involved anymore. Therefore, not sure that I see any reason to move the logic to fetch the planets into the server component. And another part of this kind of answer could be, but what about if you need to aggregate the data or do some business logic before you retrieve it?
I think you're being requested to wrap up. I have 2 daughters, and I know that very well.
It doesn't stop. I know that as well.
It doesn't stop.
Sorry. It won't stop.
Hello. It's okay. We're all super dads here. And I do have to mention that, Nick, you are joining us today after hours, after work. You probably had a long, busy shift, and now you're with us for 3 hours. So, of course, it's first and foremost you, but also your family's support and your wife's support to thank, to give you the appropriate nurture so you can actually make this long work day possible for us. So, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I think we can wrap up.
Yes,
and
let's do that.
Any questions that may be unanswered, I will document them as last time. I will send them over to you, and we can have a second round, or I can write them on LinkedIn and we can answer them slowly through LinkedIn posts. If anybody wants to have more conversations, please just DM us. We're very DM friendly. I will DM a lot of you, thanking you for joining us live today. And if you want to chat with us, with me, with Adrian, with Nick, please connect with us on LinkedIn and strike up a conversation, especially if you want to respond to Nick's offer to join regarding creating a movement for content creators who are teaching people how to code, how to test, or if you would like mentoring, if you would like to hire Adrian, for example, and he's a very good leadership coach, or if you would like my help in helping you adopt TDD or continuous delivery with your teams. I primarily teach tech leads. Reach out to us. It was lovely to have you here. I think our peak this time was about 150 people during the first hour, which is lovely. Yeah. Adrian, Nick, any last words before we wrap?
Thanks, Nick, for being here. Thanks basically everyone, right? Was a great thing. And Nick does have a big delay, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much from my side too, everyone who joined and stayed with us. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone who stayed with us so long and kept learning with us.
Connect with us and see you next time. Next week.
See you next time.
Wednesday.
Yes. So Adrian and I will be streaming next Wednesday again. I will be doing another link drop in the chat. So I'll be sharing again YouTube links, the GitHub repo, Nick's links. And if you want to strike up a conversation, don't be a stranger. DM us. Adrian, by the way, is doing all of the graphics, the animations, the Slido in the background. Huge applause to Adrian. Like, you've definitely upped the production value of today's stream. Thank you so much. Signing off. Ciao. Thank you for being with us.
Nice evening, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dennis.
Bye.
Thank you, Adrian. Bye.
Thank you, Nick.